there were large portions of history where there was some abiding peace. It was not until Hitler, another damaged man who was raised by a mother without a father, who happened to be Jewish, but persecuted 6 million Jews and put them in the oven, out of his own angst, hurt, and anger of being born into a race that he didn't want to be born into. And you have this man finally coming to this critical place in the war in the 1940s, where he's run out of fuel. So where will he get it? He has sent exploratory teams down into the desert sands that no one else was paying attention to. And suddenly he finds these huge gluts of oil. And then all the world begins to pay attention at the ending of this war. Hitler didn't get his hands on very much of it, but we did. And Russia did, and many other countries. Suddenly now, all the Hussein cousins are rising up to be multi-billionaires, which is what Osama bin Laden is. We're trying to track Osama bin Laden, and when he owns Motorola's stock in a large part, and you know, you're trying to, it's crazy. Here is one of the wealthiest men in the world. I talked to a man who once had him on his pipeline, developing oil for some of the families that are in politics today. These are very extremely wealthy people. They were nobody, and they don't think with modern minds until the oil was discovered. We are empowering them. Every drop of oil we buy. But what is the solution? We can't stop buying the oil.
Yes, the solution is we have to find other sources for oil.
And there are other solutions. God in His Word provides that the land of Israel is big enough for the Jew and the Gentile, and for the descendants of Isaac and for the descendants of Ishmael. But it would be as if you invited me to your home and I came as a guest on an extended stay. I could be in a very lovely position. But the minute I try to tell you what to do in your own home and be the governor of your house, I have transgressed. So if this could be a peaceful relationship where, as it was in the 1940s, the whole Palestinian crisis, it started in Amman, Jordan one night, not at a political table. It started where people that were like a caste system, like you have in India, the Palestinians, were at a movie theater. They had always been mistreated by the other Arab ones in power with the Hussein family. And there was a movie theater, a very new one. This was new to their city. And one of the nephews of the king was standing there in line when a Palestinian young man spit chewing gum on him. He didn't deal with it right there. He went back home after the movie, told his uncle what had happened, and the next day there were over 70,000 Palestinians murdered in the streets. They fled. Who benevolently opened up the borders for them? Israel. Put them in refugee places. They were not nasty places at first, but there was another character waiting, looming in the wings, Yasser Arafat from Tunisia. He had no kingdom, he had no fortune, he had no hope of ever escalating to the top like one of the Hussein kings. He began the PLO. He came in, I have heard this from the mouth of leaders in Arab villages, sitting right next to leaders in Jewish villages, telling me, yes, the same story while we ate poppy seed cakes. They said before he showed up, we welcomed our Jewish neighbors. They brought tourism and they filled in the roads. They emptied the swamps of the malaria mosquitoes. They built the universities. They built the highways. They brought the modern technology. We benefited and we loved them. We worked side by side. But when Yasser Arafat came, he stirred up the people. He brought the Intifada. He put us at war with one another. So the motives there again, you know, are who will be in control. Now, if you read the end of the Bible, it says that this war going on with Iraq and Iran will escalate into a full-blown war. Iran is the Persians, Iraq are the Medes. Iraq started their government in Babylonian history with a first democracy. The first democracy that ever appeared on the world scene was not with Rome or Greece, it was in Babylon. And the Bible prophecies say that it will end that way, and it will be the undoing and the final destruction of the city of Babylon. There will be a war, a very vicious war between Iran and Iraq. We see it on the horizon right now, and we are there. And then it will be resolved, and a large portion of where the Medes lives in Iraq, ancient Assyria, will be allowed peacefully to travel back and forth through Israel in this great big land, deal with them as merchants, come and go, and a large portion of Egypt. So there is a section there where the neighbors will all get along, and everyone will inherit their share, and they will come to a peace. In the meantime, we see very troubling Bible prophecy where I believe we are now. I was in Israel 1 week before this war broke out. And we read at a place called Caesarea Philippi, which are the ancient so-called gates of hell. It's where the waters come down over an extinct volcano named Mount Hermon. They flow into the Banyas, and they trickle down into the rivers of the Jordan. And that is where Jesus stood with Peter when he said, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter said, "Thou art the Christ." But then tried to rebuke Jesus from the course he was destined to take, which God had ordained. And he was immediately said, "Get behind me, Satan." Now at that very place, we stood and read the scriptures of Ezekiel 36, where God gathers this nation out of desolation, out of a diaspora scattering that has lasted 2,000 years, brings them back to a land drawn back of the sword, drawn back of the desert, where the hills will blossom and flourish again as they do today in Israel. And he speaks there that he will draw their language back as well. This has been accomplished. But then he says he will not yet get their heart. So even though the Jewish people themselves are in the land, perhaps their heart is not hooked up with the love of God as it should be. Perhaps they are not as forgiving and benevolent to their neighbors as they should be.
They're very secular, aren't they?
Yes, for the most part atheist because of the Holocaust. Hard to believe in a God that would allow it to happen. Because there again, they don't understand the scriptures. In Jeremiah, and I'm not saying they don't have teachers, wonderful rabbis, but sometimes you can study one thing you're on and miss everything else until it's around you. But in Jeremiah it says that he will fish them in the time of the recalling, and then he will hunt them. When you fish for a fish, you can find one with 4 or 5 hooks embedded in its mouth. Because if you don't like the fish, you can throw it back. It's okay. It'll swim away and get over it. But if I come after a deer or a turkey with a gun, there's no forgiving, there's no changing. It dies instantly. So there are 2 seasons. And God said the first one would be the fishing. That was when people like Golda Meir came, and Herzog, and Eliezer ben Yehuda, the pioneers of what is now modern-day Israel. They came at that time. Many came out of Europe at that time, but others, like that young man's mother, said, "No, the summer will be too hot in Palestine. We're staying here," and she died in Auschwitz. That was the time of the hunters. And you know, when the sun goes down, there are things I can't do anymore. My season's ended. I have to go in my home and turn my electricity on. I can't work in my garden on a pretty sunny day. It's over. So if we go against the season that God has ordained and foolishly continue to believe we may do as we will, then we get in some trouble. It's not his fault. So because of this, there is this great hurt. And that's why there's so much atheism or secularism in Israel. And in this mix, you have also God's sovereign time to wake up the Arab nations. They want their inheritance. Where is it? And you have this group of Palestinians that have been displaced. Now, the Jordanian king is very benevolent, both to the Jews and to the Christians. He's a wonderful young man. And he is walking a delicate balance with the Muslims as well, because he is a 42nd generation descendant of Muhammad. He's in a very hard place.
So, Shelley, you're not holding out very much hope for us to see peace over there, you know, real peace.
Not at all.
It isn't. It's not in the Bible. You know that the Bible is accurate, and
this is what you're going to see next, I believe. I could be wrong, and I would wish that I am, but I don't think so.
You think things are going to get worse before they get better?
Yes. When we were there, we also read Ezekiel 38 and 39. Ezekiel 38 and 39 begin to name nations, ancient nations. Gomar, that's Germany. Gog and Magog are Russia and the Baltics. Tubal and Meshech, Togarmah, Tarshish. These are naming all the nations that are the key players right now in Europe, Spain, up into the British Isles, including the descendants here in the United States. All of those that are down in Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, they're all named. And God says he will put hooks in their jaws, and he himself will draw them into the land of Israel on the mountains. And then he says, they will say, Israel may not have the mountains, we shall take them for ourselves. The entire contest right now is over that mountain range. All of it. Those are the cities they want to remove, and the high Golan is the high country. God says it. Then he says that they will begin to put up security fences. 1 week before the war broke out, I was there crawling through the bunkers in Ariel, looking at what there was one of the most strategic sites for guarding against sniper fire. And all the way down the road in a city that's now been declared one that shall not be removed, it was filled with razor blade fences and intelligent fences going up for the very critical, life-threatening situation of these people on that mountain.
Now, what war are you talking about?
This one right now, the one in Lebanon. Yes, with Hezbollah.
Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yes. And
so you saw the preparations that were made before the the attack, the Israelis moved in.
To protect them. And I sang at an absorption center for immigrants that have been yanked off of the Gaza Strip. Now, the sorrow of this was I was singing to elderly women, mostly Russian, and some others who had the tattoos on their forearm from going through the Holocaust. They had been thrown into ghettos in their day as young people. They had gone to a great land in Israel and settled for 30-some years, and now they were yanked off by soldiers looking in their eyes of their own people, stuck in trailers up in Ariel, totally displaced in a morbid depression. And I was there that morning ministering some hope to them when the next week, all breaking out on the news again is their trouble. I was right in that place. And what comes next